What's up? What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. I am rolling solo for this episode. Thank you guys so much for joining. I really appreciate it. I've got some stuff that's on my mind that I thought I would rant about today, and it's something that I've been, I've talked a bit about this over the last week, and we talked a bit on the members only stream about it yesterday. By the way, for those of you guys who don't know, we do a fourth episode every week that's just for subscribers over at partoftheproblem.com. If you'd like to get that, go sign up over there. We would very much appreciate that. Helps the show out. But so we were talking a bit yesterday about the firing of Jimmy Kimmel, and a little bit of a larger conversation about free speech. And there's been, over the last week, there's been all types of these topics have been coming up with first of all, the fact that Charlie Kirk stood for free speech so much, and that he was executed for that, and in many ways for that. And then there's been conversations about people getting fired for the TikTok videos that they make celebrating it. And now this Jimmy Kimmel one has really been kind of the biggest example in all of this. And then there's another interesting angle because, of course, the chairman of the FCC really blatantly threatened ABC before they fired Jimmy Kimmel. And so it just adds in, other elements. And now there's a big conversation raging about, right-wing cancel culture, free speech, government intervention, hypocrisy of the people who have been opposed to cancel culture now celebrating it. And there's a lot of different people are giving their takes on this. And I just want to say, I think I have a little bit of a different take the more I've been thinking about this than anyone else I've seen so far. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I think than anyone I've seen so far. In other words, this rant is guaranteed to satisfy no one, but I still think it's important. So let me go in saying that. And I would preface the entire thing by saying, I'm not, like, on this episode, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to, as I often am, but on this one, I'm not trying to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong, or this is the correct way to think about it and this is the incorrect way to think about it. I'm not trying to sell you on anything today. I'm trying to give you something to play with, and give you something to grapple with, and kind of maybe, perhaps think about these things in a different way. It's kind of interesting, I guess, for libertarians like myself, when there are these moments when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it seems like normies care about talking about our values. This almost always only happens when liberals are attempting to use your own values against you. So, when this happens a lot, like whenever there's like a liberal who's threatened by cancel culture, they immediately go, oh, free speech, you don't believe in government intervention or something like that. It's in the same sense, like when they're standing up for abortion, they say my body, my choice. They make like a libertarian appeal, but they only care about it as far as it serves their interests. And then obviously they will abandon that. But, it's you'd literally, I remember hearing pro-choice activists say my body, my choice as they supported vax mandates in the middle of the pandemic. It doesn't bother them that they're being hypocritical, because they are just attempting to manipulate you. And I guess I would start by saying this, kind of like to zoom out about the moment that we're in right now, which is particularly what's kind of appalling to me about the liberals who are like trying to needle right-wingers for celebrating Jimmy Kimmel being fired, or for celebrating, even just people who got like lost their job for making TikTok videos and stuff like that. And I don't know. I think it's worth saying at the beginning of this that, like, the way I see things in the big picture here is that the most remarkable part of, say, the last week, let's say since Charlie Kirk's assassination, the most amazing part of all of this is that there's been no violent retaliation. And that's really great. Like, it's really, really good. That was like the most important, it was the most dangerous part of this moment, and the biggest potential for disaster and escalation. And there's been no retaliation. And right-wing America, broadly speaking, deserves a lot of credit for that. A lot of credit for that. There's been a lot of influential right-wing people who have encouraged calm and discouraged any type of retaliation. And there's also just, there's obviously, like, Christianity is a major force in the right wing in the United States of America, and whatever else, is everybody involved in not having a violent response to this deserves a lot of credit. And so, like, in this moment when there's like tremendous anger, tremendous frustration, tremendous pain on the right wing in America, the fact that there hasn't been any type of violent response, it should be, I think, applauded. And instead, the reaction is like to be mad at them for celebrating the fact that this disgusting Jimmy Kimmel got kicked off of the air. And I just think that's an unreasonable, like, standard to place on right wing America. I mean, look, dude, when George Floyd got killed, there were billions of dollars in property damage done as a response, and dozens of people were killed, and hundreds at least were assaulted and, injured and things like that. There's a lot of violence in response to that. There's been none in response to Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk was not like a career criminal who died by some freak thing where, I mean, however you feel, I know we're not even going to get into that. I know there's the competing autopsy reports and there's all these other things, and you could feel however you feel about a cop putting his knee on a guy's neck and all of that. But, like, if a cop did that to 100 people in a row, it is unlikely that anyone would die from it. Like, it's a little bit of a freak thing that, like, that would end up killing you. Again, not saying you should do that or nothing like that. Not saying I want anyone to do that to me or I want to do that to anyone else. But, like, what you had was like a career criminal, a man who had, like, what was it? He had, like, robbed a pregnant woman or something like that. And he had, like, no, okay. But by the way, none of that means you should be mistreated by a cop or anything. But, like, the point is that Charlie Kirk never did nothing like that. Charlie Kirk was just a Christian who liked to go to college campuses and talk. And he didn't, like, happen to die by something that normally won't kill you. He was executed by something that will kill you 100% of the time. And so, like, just saying, the fact that there's been no violence in response, you'd think that ought to be something that would, like, be at the top of everyone's list. Like, okay, that's the most important thing. Kudos for that. But that's not what's going on here. And instead, this seems to be an attempt at a rallying cry of, like, oh, Jimmy Kimmel was a victim, he's a free speech warrior who was, like, persecuted for, standing up to the regime or something like that. And like, Stephen Colbert, he said the other day, we are all Jimmy Kimmel now, which is really, I mean, there is something to that. Like, I was making this point on the members only stream yesterday, but, like, that's your comment? We're all Jimmy Kimmel now? Not we're all Charlie Kirk? We're all Jimmy Kimmel? Like, you see that as the most egregious violation of free speech in the last week? Because I thought it was the guy who went to college campuses to talk about ideas and got executed. Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this season on Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. It's very easy to play. You pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you're correct, you could win some serious cash. So this is like, you don't even really need to understand sports that well to understand you're going to pick whether LeBron James scores more or less than this many points. And I will tell you, I really enjoy the stuff. Always been a fan of laying a few bucks down on a game. It makes the game a million times more enjoyable. Even you just put a few bucks down, you bet your buddy $10 who's going to win. All of a sudden, you got something to really root for. Download the app today and use promo code POTP to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code POTP to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Check them out. Check them out. Prize Picks, promo code POTP to get that $50 in lineups when you play your first $5. All right, let's get back into the show. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about, like how I think about these things. And again, this is like when I was saying, I'm not like trying to sell you. I'm just trying to give you this to kick around and see what you think. Because often I think for people like in the position I'm in, whatever that is, podcaster or pundit, commentator, oftentimes we tend to think that where our views on policy are the most important thing. Whereas I think that typically for podcasters or pundits or whatever, actually just like the way you're thinking about things is the most important thing. The kind of the way you're thinking about things, the way you talk about things with other people, the way you get people thinking about things is actually much more important than even like what policy you stand for. Because like if we're being honest here, we're not in the business of making policy. That doesn't really matter. But we are in the business of getting people to think about things. And so like, that's actually what you're doing here. So in some ways that's more important. Now, by the way, to protect my libertarian street cred here, and I don't, I mean this, I'm not saying it just to protect that, but just to be clear here, I'm against the FCC existing. I'm against the FCC threatening companies. I think it was, I think it was counterproductive and just wrong and incredibly stupid for the FCC chair to start threatening ABC the way that he did there. And I think in some ways it takes away what otherwise would be a win for the right wingers. It's almost like cheating at a game that you can win straight up. And so like you're in a sense you're like, oh, but if I cheat, then I just took that away from myself from getting the clean win. And now everyone can see that and point to the fact that you cheated and it almost doesn't count in the same way. You should have just let me get the win. That's kind of how I feel about this whole thing. But I don't necessarily agree with some other libertarians who, in a sense, are arguing like that Jimmy Kimmel's free speech is being violated here. And this might upset some people when I say this, but I'll kind of try to explain my thinking about this once again. I'm not exactly trying to convince you. I'm more just trying to, let's think about things like this together. But I would say that that Jimmy Kimmel is in effect, in function, he's a part of the regime. And he has been for a long time now. And I just view things differently. I don't view the regime as having rights the way all the rest of us do. I think that like almost if you could imagine, if you kidnapped a child, right? And then someone stole that child from you. Like, have you been victimized? Like, obviously the answer is no, right? Like, even though like a child was taken from you, it wasn't your child to begin with. And so you're not the victim here. You joined the criminal kidnapper class, and now someone else in the criminal kidnapper class out-criminaled you, but I don't care. Like, you're not a victim anymore in this game because you already crossed that line. And in the same sense, where like, if you were somebody who say like against murder, as most of us should be, but like, it's like if the Bloods and the Crips start killing each other, it's not the same thing as if the Bloods just start killing innocent people. Like that's different. Two gangs fighting it out is a little bit different than gangs terrorizing innocent people. And I almost kind of view things like that. Like in a sense where this is two gangs who I don't like, who are fighting it out. But in that case, you want to think more about being strategic than any moral, any moral consideration. If there's two groups of killers who are killing each other, and like say one of the groups of killers has vowed that once they're done killing this gang, they'll stop the killing, and the other one says as soon as we're done killing this gang, we're going to kill all the rest of you guys, so we might root for this one gang, because there's no principle really involved anymore. It's all killers at this point. And I don't just I'm not just randomly assigning regime to Jimmy Kimmel. I think he joined the regime a long time ago. And in fact, I think that for anybody, not just libertarians, but for anybody who's opposed to the current regime, it's important to think about things this way. I remember, so this must, man, this must be back in 2010 or something like that. It's shortly after I got into all this political stuff, and the Ron Paul revolution blew my mind, and I started going down the rabbit hole and reading all types of radical political books and stuff. So it's right in the first couple years while I was in that, and there was it was the School Sucks podcast. Brett, oh man, I apologize, because I really liked those guys. I think they stopped doing the podcast, but it was Brett Verratti or something. I'm blanking. I'm butchering your last name. I apologize, Brett, if you're listening. And I know Brett. But so they had this, there was the show called the School Sucks podcast. And this was early in the internet. This is whatever, 15 years ago or something. And maybe even a little more. I might be a little off in these dates, but it's around there, somewhere around 2010. But they had a viral video, which I don't even know I don't even know what the numbers were back then, but it might have been the YouTube and all these things were just not as big. And so the video might have had a couple 100,000 views on it, but we were all yeah, oh my God, this thing is taken off. So many people are here. It's just was a different world. But this video blew my mind, and it did that. It did this for a lot of people because it was a little viral sensation. But I remember being so interested in this, and then it was one of those moments where I was wait, that can't be true. And then I was I gotta go read about this. And then it turns out it's all true. But anyway, so the I've probably mentioned this over the years because I find this stuff so interesting. This was a real red pill moment for me when I didn't know anything about this. But basically what he was talking about was how I think the subject of the video was about his interest in the rise of the Nazis. And he was how the hell did this happen to Germany? And okay, there's all these parts to the story, but here's one part that rarely ever comes up. And so about 100 years before the rise of the National Socialists, Workers' Party, it was the Prussian Empire. This is the geographic and cultural precursor to Nazi Germany. This was the Prussian Empire was the Second Reich. So Adolf Hitler is trying to start the Third Reich. This is the Second Reich that came immediately before, the Second Great German Empire. And the Prussians were having a big problem where their soldiers, their king's army, or conscripted, soldiers, they would do these crazy things run away, or piss themselves and then get killed on the battlefield, or refuse to fight, all these different things. And this was a major problem for the Prussian elites. And they ultimately came up with a solution for the problem. And their solution was that they would start what became known as school. And the idea was that they would get your kids at a really young age and school them to be loyal subjects of the king. And so by the time they were 17, 18 years old, they had been totally propagandized by the government, and they would be loyal subjects to the king and go fight in his wars and not think about silly little things like themselves, whether they wanted to do this. And it was, by all accounts, largely successful. So successful that it was exported to the United States of America. And this is why we still call it school. And you I don't know if you've ever thought about that before, but you're why is there all these German sounding names? Why am I dropping my 5-year-old off at kindergarten? It's like, okay, because that's where it comes from. And Horace Mann, who was the godfather of American education, he even explicitly wrote about this, that we are adopting the Prussian system because it's so effective for the Prussians. And like he had some line in there about like, well, they use it for autocratic means, but we will use it for good Republican, something like that. But I mean, look, if you just look at it for what it is, and this is why it was like kind of a powerful red pill moment. I mean, at least especially in like 2010, to me, it sure was, that you're like, oh my God, this whole thing is like a brainwashing, mechanism. And if libertarians are going to conceive of like the existence of the state, you can't not think about that too. Like, oh my God, this is a whole huge other component of it. Tom Woods had this great it was like a speech. It was right around that time too. Must have been around 2010. But it was the first time I ever heard him where he used this analogy where he was just talking about like government school and like think about it. And by the way, they didn't call it, education centers. They called it school. Like what they're doing there is not educating. They're schooling you. So Tom Woods he said it like this. He goes, this was his thought experiment was he goes, just imagine that Walmart ran all the schools. Okay. And so like the idea was just like imagine it's anyone except the government. Imagine a private company was running the schools. And he goes, okay, so like Walmart is in charge of all the schools. And the first thing they have you do, they take your kids from like age 5 to 18, and the first thing they have to do every single morning is pledge allegiance to Walmart. And then in the classroom, there would be pictures of all the Walmart CEOs all around the classroom. And they would kind of like make up all of these stories like, the first Walmart CEO was such a pure man that he never told a lie. One time he chopped down a cherry tree and he said, Dad, I did it. I could not lie to you. This is like obviously made up shit about what heroes and wonderful people they were. Oh, this Walmart CEO was the great emancipator, and this Walmart CEO. Meanwhile, if you look back at it, you find out like a lot of them killed a whole lot of people and did a lot of real messed up stuff. And in fact, they all told a lot of lies. But I'm just saying, if you looked at this as it was Walmart, and Walmart was just praising Walmart, and Walmart was making young children pledge allegiance to Walmart, we would all immediately look at it and be like, this is sick. This is sick cult-like behavior. Okay? But that just is normal to all of us when it comes to the state, because that's just the way it's supposed to be done. And it's like over the last decade or so, a lot of people would start coming to this conclusion that they're like, oh my God, public schools have been turned into indoctrination centers. And it's like, no, they have not been. They have not been turned into indoctrination centers. They have switched up the indoctrination curriculum to something that is more particularly egregious to you, and understandably so. But nothing's changed. They're just indoctrinating them. Like that's been the goal the whole time. And so like this is something that has to be understood along with kind of the more fundamental 101 libertarian understanding of what the government is, which you would think is like a pretty important thing to understand. That I think liberalism in many ways is like allergic to this understanding, but it's a pretty basic, it's like the foundational libertarian insight about politics. And it's not really particularly libertarian in nature. It's just objectively true. But and this is why, like, when people are having these conversations and they're like, well, it's different if private people do it or the government is involved or blah, it violates the First Amendment if the government is involved, but it doesn't violate the First Amendment if the government's not involved or any of this. But it's like, I think very few of the people who are in this broader conversation have really examined like the foundational building blocks of all of this. So like, number one, like, what is the government? What is the state? And as libertarians know well, right, there only is one coherent, objective definition for government. And what government is a group of people who hold a legal monopoly on the use of aggressive violence. That really is the only definition of a government that actually describes what it is. You can do pretty much anything a government can do except the aggressive violence. You can even, in most parts of this country, use violence to defend yourself. You just can't do it aggressively. You can't use aggression, and they can. That's the difference. I mean, you could write laws. You could even, come up with a tax code. You just can't enforce it. They can enforce it. If you were to do what the government does, it would be considered theft, murder, threats, imprisonment, kidnapping, torture. When they do it, it's called war, taxation, collateral damage, detainment, official letters from a court. But if you did it, it was, so this is essentially like just what the nature of government is. Now, to be a libertarian is to reject that, and to embrace that is to be something else. But to understand that is just to get things correct. That just objectively is what the government does. And if any private individual did what the government does, they would be arrested and spend a long, long time in jail, if not get the death penalty. And so when you're talking about the government, you're talking about, an instrument of force. Now, there is a tremendous tendency, particularly amongst liberals, to pretend that government is something else, that government is the referee in the game, or that government is all of us collectively, or that government is the nation. But none of that's true. Like, that's all objectively not true. You could just disprove it by thinking it through. But then, so Murray Rothbard, in his phenomenal work, Anatomy of the State, which I highly recommend everyone read if you haven't already. It's like 60 pages long or something. You can read it in one sitting. It's a great little pamphlet, booklet, essay type thing. And the point that he makes in this wonderful book is that essentially the government is a gang that took over and gained legitimacy in the popular imagination of its people. And that's essentially all the government is. But as he even gets into in that book, it's more than just the actual government. And he gets into like the marriage between the government and the intellectual class, and how there's this like huge reinforcement mechanism between the two. And like the intellectual class doesn't really, let's just say they don't really command much value in a true marketplace. Like in a true marketplace, there's just not that much demand for people who are like, I go and read books or something like that. Or I teach sociology or something like that. You probably only need that many, and there's not that many people willing to pay that much for it. And you're just not going to become a multimillionaire off that. However, when the government decides that they'll build public universities and libraries and back student loans and all this, they kind of make a market for these intellectuals that's much more lucrative than the market otherwise would be. And in return, the intellectuals find a way to justify the role of the state. Now, much like school itself, the role that these intellectuals are playing is essentially brainwashing, propagandizing the country into accepting the regime's policy. And in this sense, thinking of them as separate from the state is substantially less helpful and accurate than thinking of them as all part of one apparatus. This is what Curtis Yarvin, who I think it was probably around this time too, probably around 2010. I didn't read him till much later, but around that time, I think, is when he came up with his term was the cathedral. and the cathedral encompassed like the actual government, all the shadow parts of the government, but it also incorporated corporate media, academia, Hollywood, things like this, because they're all kind of used together. And so, for example, like take academia for a second. Like academia is okay. Many of the people who work at, say, private universities are not government employees, but the whole industry is a government program. The whole thing only exists because the government is backing the loans, or nowadays just giving the loans to the kids and then giving the legal protection to the school and then giving, like, it's all just this big government program that happens to end with everybody spouting approved government propaganda. If you think about it like this, right? There are, maybe this is a good way to look at it. So you remember when it came out that the NIH was funding gain of function research in the Wuhan lab in China? Well, it wasn't them, right? If you remember, it was a subsidiary. So like they gave a grant to a company, that company gave the money to the Wuhan lab. But you understand, I think all of us, like in effect, we should all feel comfortable in saying the NIH gave that money to the Wuhan lab. Because if you don't conceive of it that way, then all you're acknowledging is that all the government has to do is say, well, we gave it to all they have to do is have a private company do it. And then they get to say, what? That was done by a private company. It wasn't done by us. But we'd all kind of recognize that that's pretty ridiculous, right? I mean, imagine, let's say, let's say that there was a secret act passed by our government to create another government department, but it was a secret government department. And so they didn't tell the public that that was a government department. Would that make it any less of a government department? In other words, like, does it matter what we call it? Or does it matter what the government calls it? Or does it matter like how they're acting? What function are they serving right now? And especially like something like the college campus stuff. Like, I mean, if you're being funded by the government, your whole industry is propped up by the government, and you're regurgitating the propaganda of the government. Okay, in some technical sense, you're a private person who isn't a government employee, but in a much more real sense, you are a part of the regime, and you should be regarded as such. And so, look, I mean, because this is like how all types of things work. A great book on this to read is what's it called? Oh, damn it, am I going to blank on this? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Great book. Where they talk all about like the private companies that the CIA uses to do so much of their dirty work. And if we're going to say that's not the government, then I don't know. It's like you're just giving the government an obvious end around. So there's no restrictions on government at all, because like this thing is obviously still a part of that. Like clearly, in the same way they say, this is what they say about the Federal Reserve. They say the Federal Reserve is private. What are you talking about? There's a private company that we created through an act of Congress. They just have the power to print the money. But I mean, what is that? Like, what if to use Walmart again, is that, let's say that Walmart was created by an act of Congress, and then every few years the president appointed the CEO of Walmart. Would you consider Walmart a private company at that point, or would you go, I think you're part of the government now, right? The same with, look, it's true with all types of like weapons contractors, and I mean, like, what is the Brookings Institute? Is that just a private organization? Does it make any sense to think of them as such? What are they funded by? A mix of foreign governments and weapons manufacturers? And that makes a private company? Like, no, not really. Not in any true spirit, in any true sense of that term. And, I think that, another non-government or NGOs, right? So like NGOs, like, by the way, isn't it interesting that they have to, the first two, they have to say non-governmental? It's like, if you ever start a company, you probably wouldn't think that those need to be the first two words of your company, because it's actually non-governmental. So you don't need to say it, and like, are these NGOs who like let's say they take US taxpayer money and then they go, to form like pro-democracy Ukrainian media companies that urge people to take to the streets to overthrow the Yanukovych government. Am I supposed to look at that George Soros NGO as just, oh, that's just the free market? And so again, look, I do just think you come back to a thing where I'm not saying it's perfect, and obviously it's a little bit arbitrary in some of these cases, what exactly you consider the regime and what you do not consider the regime. But just for example, let's just say, just a hypothetical situation. Let's say that, let's just imagine in Washington, D.C., you had like a think tank that was funded by weapons manufacturers that was arguing for war. Now, I know that's crazy. We would never find that in the real Washington, D.C., but let's just say, hypothetically, there was a think tank that's funded by weapons companies that's going to government to present policy papers saying why we need a big buildup in the defense budget. So here you have these weapons companies that are creatures of the taxpayer. They literally just sell their weapons to the US federal government that buys them with our money, right? With our money that they took from us by force. They create this weapons company. The weapons company creates a think tank or funds a think tank. The think tank is arguing for more of our money to be spent on, on weapons. Now, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, a president or a dictator or a politician, someone who's an official government, employee, says, I'm proposing a new law that you're not allowed to do that. Like, Mr. Think Tank guy, shut up. You're not allowed to write papers anymore that say you want a higher defense budget. Is it so obvious that the libertarian position and pure theory and morality is that that's a violation of free speech? It's like, I actually don't think so. I don't think so at that point. Now, I understand. I can hear the pushback already. Remember, I'm trying to get you to play with an idea. I'm not trying to sell you on anything. And people can say, well, that's not Jimmy Kimmel exactly. Okay. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Guys, as I've told you many times in the past, I have benefited from therapy myself, and I know a lot of people who have too. I highly recommend it. And if that's you, if you're one of the people out there who are thinking about maybe starting therapy, maybe you're on the fence, well, let me tell you about BetterHelp. It's the easiest way to do it. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. It's really the 21st century way to do therapy. You just fill out a brief questionnaire online, and you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charges. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Visit them at betterhelp.com/problem, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/problem, BetterHelp.com/problem. All right, let's get back into the show. I think when you really, at Jimmy Kimmel's level, and especially like through COVID, when he's at that position where he just decides, I'm going to stop being a comedian and I'm going to start being a mouthpiece for the regime. And I'm going to literally mock my fellow Americans, advocate that they don't get health care if they haven't gotten the COVID vax. Remember, what did he say? You can go die now, wheezy, or whatever his comments were. You do put yourself in a different category, in my opinion. Like, you made yourself part of the cathedral. And in the same sense that, like, if you were going to me, like, oh my God, there's like a strong man political leader is going up there and saying that these think tanks who are taking money from weapons companies and are advocating for more war, we're shutting them all down. And you would go, this is a violation of free speech. I don't know. I don't think so, actually. I think this is gangster shit. These are two gangs fighting, and I have every right to just like not care about that And, if you were to ask me, oh, Mr. Libertarian, I thought you liked free speech. You'd be like, well, I don't think they're, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think any of this should exist. I don't think that weapons company should exist. I don't think that think tank should exist. And I don't think this politician should exist. But you know what? They all do. And so it's not so clear from first principles that I got to think that these members of the regime are citizens exercising their free speech. I just do not see it that way. And so I understand where people can disagree, and it's like I said, it is kind of arbitrary when exactly somebody becomes a member of the regime. And I guess to that I would kind of say, yeah, there are lines that are arbitrary that must be drawn in society. It is not like exactly clear when like the age of consent should you be allowed to have sex and drive a car at 18 or 19 or 20? I don't know, but there's got to be a line. It seems somewhere around there seems just about right. I mean, I don't know. You could be like 8-year-olds can't be allowed to drive a car and 35-year-olds certainly have to be. Where do we draw that line exactly? I mean, you try to get it as close to right as you think. And I'm sure we could all, look at like some line and go, no, 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 that's way too young. No, 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 that's way too old. But you got to draw it somewhere. You have to, because otherwise you can't move forward. You can't have a society where children can operate vehicles, and you can't have a society where adults are not allowed to. So just for function, you have to draw the line somewhere. And yes, it's going to be somewhat arbitrary where you draw it. I think Jimmy Kimmel was way over the line of just being a member of the regime. I don't consider that speech rights anymore at that point. And so I'm not one of these people who's going like, oh my God, I have so much sympathy for Jimmy Kimmel because he's gotten his First Amendment rights violated or something like that. I don't think that's correct. I still think it's really, really stupid and a bad direction to go down. Now, so essentially, this is why I'm going to make nobody satisfied with this argument. I say all of that to say I still am. If you ask me what policy I support, I think it's just a disaster that the FCC chairman gave them that out. And look, like what I was saying before about how governments are gangs. I mean, look, what the FCC chairman did was some real gangster shit, right? He literally said to him, he goes, we could either handle this the easy way or the hard way. Like, you don't have to jump, you don't have to, it's not a crazy stretch to get from we could either handle things the easy way or the hard way to like gangster shit. That's what they were doing. Now, I don't think in this case, that's actually why Jimmy Kimmel got fired. I think Jimmy Kimmel got fired because a big corporation jumped on that opportunity. It kind of, with all the outrage against Jimmy Kimmel, it gave them like the perfect out. So you have all this outrage about the dumbass thing that he said. People are pissed off. You got these affiliates who are threatening. And then the FCC chair threatens and you go, perfect. Now we can dump this big contract, which wasn't justified anyway. But in the same sense of like the example that I've used before, and this is something I got to say, this is something that people really have a tough time with in political thinking. This is what I like to call the white men can't jump philosophy. But was that Rosie Perez, what she says in that movie, right? Because people do in politics, people have a tough time thinking in like second, third order effects. But anyway, to my point, right? Essentially where I'm at here is that this is no longer to me like a moral liberty issue. Like, this is morally wrong for the government to get involved in this way. To me, these are different wings of the government fighting, is essentially how I view this, which, by the way, also happens all the time. People make a mistake and think of the state as a monolith. It's not. There's all types of examples throughout history where the State Department and the Defense Department are at odds. The CIA and the FBI have had a very contentious relationship. Obviously, there's different presidential administrations that have warred with each other, and there's beefs within administrations. We're just Kamala Harris, I think, just came out with a book, and there's all types of battles between the vice president's office and the president's office. So it's not, but I'm saying I think of this more as a feud between the CIA and the FBI? Is anyone's rights being violated? Like, I don't know. You're all in a constant perpetual state of violating people's rights. So I don't know. So it's not a moral issue. So then what it becomes is purely a strategic issue. And so purely on strategic grounds, it only hurt the right wing. Now, what I was saying before with the Rosie Perez thing is like people have a tough time understanding second and third order effects and like how things play out in the long run. It's much more challenging to try to look at that than it is to just go, what's the immediate next step? You know, and so what Rosie Perez, right, her dumb line in White Man Can't Jump was you know, sometimes when you win, you really lose. And sometimes when you lose, you really win. And sometimes when you tie, you actually win or lose. And sometimes when you win or lose, you actually tie. Anyway, the point kind of being that in this situation, Jimmy Kimmel was getting fucked up. He's already losing the fight. Like, if you were in a big fight and you're just like dominating the opponent, you know, you're going into the 12th round and you're up 11 rounds to nothing and you're like, I'm just going to keep killing this guy. Do you want the referee to cheat for you at that point? No, it just robs your victory from you. It just gives them a talking point. Jimmy Kimmel was getting destroyed. His ratings have been tanking. The guy is a laughing stock. Nobody cares anymore. And he's just getting dunked on left and right because his point there was like the most dumbass bonehead point. Like it didn't even make any sense. His argument was, oh, MAGA's trying to make it look like it wasn't one of their own. Like, no, they're not. It clearly wasn't. There's no evidence pointing to that. It's as silly as any of the other conspiracies. But like, think about how you totally just like take that victory away from yourself now because the dumbass fucking FCC chairman had to go threatening them. And now they can make it out to be a free speech issue. So it's just purely on like the strategy of it. This was a bad strategy. And, you know, I see people, there's a few things. Like I see a lot of people who understandably just want to celebrate this. And they're kind of like in this, like, I don't care. You guys started playing this game, so we're going to start playing this game too. And I've heard a few, you know, popular, you know, people who I like, who have been making that attitude. That's right. We are hypocrites. We're being hypocritical now. And we are, you know, violating free speech and we're embracing cancel culture and all this stuff. And like, first of all, as I said before with my, you know, cathedral regime worldview, I don't even think that's true. So I don't think there's any need to concede that you're being a hypocrite in this case. But on top of that, you know, when people are going like, oh, you know, Charlie Kirk, that's what he was doing. We tried it that way and you shot that guy in the neck. So now we're doing it this way. It's like, well, first of all, I don't think it's a great way to honor the guy's legacy to say we're going to reject everything that he stood for. And second of all, what you're leaving out of there is that we were finally winning. Like the anti-woke culture war has finally been paying off over the last few years. And a big part of why they were able to win is because they were able to make the principled argument and win a lot of people over based off that. And so if you do, even though I'm telling you that I don't actually view it as being such a simple free speech issue, it is going to be perceived that way by most people. And once you go, yeah, we're not being principled either. Okay, well then now you no longer can persuade those people who are persuaded by principle. That's a big thing to keep in mind. It's important to keep in mind that we were winning. Like this battle, Jimmy Kimmel was losing. Charlie Kirk was winning. Charlie Kirk flipped the youth vote so much that it got Donald Trump elected and had him win the popular vote for the first time. After getting killed in that demographic, he's now winning that demographic. That demographic doesn't even know who Jimmy Kimmel is, by the way, because that's how much the old dinosaur media has been getting killed. And so it does, to me, this just feels like on one hand, it's like strategically, you're giving them a talking point and you're kind of snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. You know, like this, you're already winning this. Just keep winning this game. I don't know, like, look, obviously for a lot of people out there, right? Like I was given the right wing credit for there being no retaliatory violence so far. Well, obviously to a lot of people, that would actually feel kind of good to just do that. Like in the short run, that might make you feel better. But I think most of us could see, like, yeah, but in the long run, that's a disaster. In the long run, it's such a moral victory for the right wing that there was no violent response. And that's something that will persuade a lot of reasonable people to go like, you keep saying they're the bad guys, but actually they're the ones who really showed restraint here. Like, that's how you win long term. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Kalshi. I've been telling you guys about Kalshi for a little while. It is a regulated prediction market where people trade on real world events. So think politics, sports, even weather forecasts. So right now, the New York City mayoral race is the hot ticket item. Millions are wagering on who will take City Hall come November. Mamdani is the front runner. The Kalshi markets are currently giving him an 82% chance of winning. Now, again, one of the reasons why I like checking Kalshi is because these are real markets backed by money. These are where people are putting their money, which is always a better predictor and indicator than just about anything else. Go check them out, Kalshi.com. Over 5 million users are trading on politics, culture, even the weather. Go check them out, Kalshi.com, promo code problem. That's Kalshi.com. Check them out today. All right, let's get back into the show. And, I got to say, there is this, and I understand it. I understand feeling this way, particularly after everything that's happened in the last, week, or I guess week and a day now. But there's like a temptation to feel like, hey, things have gotten so far that I don't want to hear these, I don't want to hear like, oh, we can't embrace this, or this could be used against us. This is already being used against us. And, this is one area where I really will defend the libertarians. And I think that they end up getting dismissed by right wingers. And I think, look, I'm a libertarian, but I think I'm the first to admit when there are areas where the libertarians are being goofy and the right wingers are actually making a point. This is one area where I really think it's like libertarians have consistently been proven right about this, and still their advice just never gets heard. But it really is true that you do not want to set precedents that this model is how things are going to work. The top-down government managing of these things, or government intervention in these issues, is just never ends up being a friend of right-wingers in the long run. Perhaps sometimes in the very short run. But, even if you think about the Bud Light boycotts or the Target boycotts or Elon Musk buying Twitter or any of these things, it was always market-based actions that ended up actually working to roll back some of this insanity. And, around, after 9/11 and in the next couple years, it was Ron Paul and the libertarians who were warning right-wingers against the creation of the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA and just the massive spying apparatus that was built up over the following decades. And right-wingers at the time were like, no, screw you, libertarian, pussies. We're doing this because we got a threat, and we're going to go get that threat. We're going to go get the Muslims. And that entire apparatus ended up being turned on right-wing Americans. And all of them, the Department of Homeland Security decided that domestic terrorism was the biggest threat, and that it was, MAGA Republicans were the domestic terrorists. You look at the way they went after the people on January 6th. And then there does seem to be some feeling amongst right-wingers where most of them would probably admit, yeah, you guys were right about that one. You guys were right. We should have listened to you when you said this will end up being weaponized against us. And then whenever the next time comes where libertarians are going, yeah, dude, but you don't want to do this because this could be weaponized against you, they go, oh, please. They just never say. But even if you feel like it's already being weaponized against us, things can get worse. I promise you, things can get much, much worse. And always think about that. Always think about whether this is really something that won't have like massive, counter reactions against us in the future. And so like, I just essentially feel that we're like in the marketplace of ideas. If there aren't restraints on us, we kill these guys every time, every time. And, part of that is that you gotta, like, to win this fight, you gotta, and particularly when there's a crisis, this is what a lot of people really struggle with. But when there's a crisis, that's when you have to be at your most rational and stick to your principles the most. Like, it's very important because these things are going to age a certain way. It's like, look, I guess I'm not alone in this, because I saw also Nick Fuentes was also catching some flack from his audience, as I was, both for the same reason, because we both has said that there's no evidence to suggest that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. And it is really something, just like the way the lowbrow conspiratorial mind works, that everyone's going, Nick got the call too, Dave got the call, and now Nick got the call, and we're all, and like, whatever. I'm saying none of these things prove either side is right or wrong, but isn't it, if you would say like me and Nick Fuentes, like two of the most prominent critics of Israel in the country, and they're both telling you there's no evidence here, and you go, well, that's proof that they both got the phone call. You're like, isn't it more likely the opposite? I mean, I'm not saying that that alone proves anything, but isn't it more likely that it's like, yeah, there's just not enough evidence here? But part of the thing that I think a lot of people are kind of missing here is like, okay, but if you just jump on a theory with no evidence to back it up, how does that look when the dust settles? Like, do you think about that at all? I mean, number one, I just wouldn't want to do it because I think it's wrong. But on top of that, also, you got to think about, like, how's this thing going to age? Like that's all part, we're all constantly building our track record. Everybody is, in their personal life, in their public life. You're always building your track record. And you want to think about that too. Like, there will, guaranteed, right wingers, there will be a time in the next decade where you want free speech. You want that to be on your side. You are better off having a track record of being consistent and principled in that realm, or you're never going to be able to reach people who care about being reasoned and principled. And to me, it's like, oh, that's what I'm all about. Those are the people I want to reach. And I just think that's something people should keep in mind here. It just doesn't help anything, especially when they're all dying already. And look, as I've said before, I think essentially what happened here was this really was the market. Like, this was Jimmy Kimmel just, look, let's just say it like this. There was a much bigger cancellation attempt on Joe Rogan than there was on Jimmy Kimmel. It was much more organized, much more central, with celebrities, Neil Young saying he's going to take all his music off of Spotify and all this other stuff. But Joe Rogan didn't get canceled because Joe Rogan's numbers were massive. Now, Jimmy Kimmel didn't have any of that protection. So in some ways, I think this was the market, but the FCC threatening the shit out of them and then essentially taking credit for it afterward kind of robs you of that victory. It is as if the ref started threatening one team and then after the game started bragging about how they really cheated and won that game. Well, what's that doing for the side that won? That's not helping you. That's robbing you of your victory. And so, like, I don't think it's as simple as some people are making it out, that it's like, well, Jimmy Kimmel's just a guy. He's just a comedian telling a joke and people shouldn't get fired over telling a joke or something like that. It's like, no, there's a little bit more to it than that. He consciously made a decision to join the regime and to be a spokesman for the regime. And at the same time, like, you go into a war zone, you pick up a rifle, you're a combatant now. It does not matter if you are officially a member of that military or not. You pick up a rifle and you start marching toward an opposing army, you're fair game now. And in the same sense, you made yourself part of the regime. I don't care about this on a moral free speech issue level. I don't. This is the realm of strategy now. And in the realm of strategy, I think this is all wrong. I think right-wingers are much better off if they just publicly say, we don't want the government involved in this at all, but we're all turning off, Jimmy Kimmel, which the thing is you guys already have. I don't know. I just saw a report on the numbers. The numbers were so bad, dude. This podcast is doing better than Jimmy Kimmel's show was. And believe me, I do not have a contract like Jimmy Kimmel. This thing, he was already losing. Just something to think about. Something for all you guys to play with. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys on Monday. Peace.